Hello and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. And this month, DerpyTW has been into Warhammer. We're talking about the Skaven today. I don't know anything about Warhammer, so it's all coming from this. Derpy says, "Ahoy, Captain, doing a parlay based on one of the games I've been playing, Warhammer Total War 3. They were also in Warhammer 2, but 3 is the newest. Who are they, you may ask? Well, it's naturally the sneakiest and most murder-death-killiest of all the factions, the Skaven. Basically, the question is, what kind of Skaven leader do I want to be? And for those of us, like me, who are not familiar with this faction at all, they're basically... Derpy says, they don't fight as well as the other factions of Warhammer Fantasy. They're not the martial experts of the elves, the archers that are a force to be reckoned with. They're not heavily armored chaos. I don't know what that is, but anyway. Orcs is my blind guess. They're not the immortal tomb kings risen from the dead, nor the dwarves with their steam gadgets and runes. No, the Skaven are pound for pound weak. But when you breed like rats, well, nothing else will keep up. I like how that part's written. Though there is one saving grace that are all the smartest and knowledgeable factions are aware of. The Skaven are as prodigious in treachery as they are at breeding. It's thought the only reason the Skaven haven't done a Vermintide to fully wipe out all but the Skaven off the planet is that they're just too busy infighting, securing their own positions in order to team up. So, interesting, we've got some starter points. The three things that come to mind with this parlay for me are, 1, how do you optimize for a kind of Zerg-like faction? The Zerg from StarCraft are what come to mind, but zombies, ants, you find yourself the leader of a very populous, but kind of bad overall faction. What do you do? What is a good approach for that type of army, right? So that's one thing. Second thing, the infighting bit. It sounds like, I don't know anything about Warhammer, but from what Derpy has described, one of the defining characteristics of the Skaven, among Zerg-like factions, is that these folks are big infighters. So it's not only about optimizing against fighting others, we'll talk about that, it's also about optimizing against themselves. We do have a couple of different examples of faction leaders, which is the third bit we'll start with. You seem to want me to pick from the options presented in the game. So we have some archetypes to pick from. We'll start there. Cool. So let's read what they are. Now, there was a lot of information included in this parlay. Derpy, you said, also, if you feel it's a bit too long, feel free to shorten it. It's quite the wall of text. It is too long for me to read all of it or go over all of it in the parlay, but that doesn't mean I can't use it as background information. So I'm just going to summarize some of this. But remember, the question is not only basically how to manage a very Zergy, kind of numerous faction and how to deal with the infighting, but also you can't just pick anything. We're picking from the options available. So we have 4, it looks like. Oh, 5? There's a lot. 5. Okay, and I'll probably butcher all their names. But the first one is basically a scientist faction. Derpy says, the man with the plan. This is Ikit Claw of Clan Scryer. These are very rat-like names. And the man with all the rattling guns. Ah, yes, Gatling guns, but rattling, because they're Anyway, shooting little bits of warpstone. I don't know what that is, but cool. Plague Claw catapults, throwing bits of warpstone and disease bits. Ew, Geneva Convention violations. Flamethrowers, plague wind mortars. Again, they sound like bioengineers. You might wonder what is warpstone? I did wonder that. Why does this dude love it so much? Well, it's basically uranium. Okay, that's bad. They have nuclear explosives. Okay, basically they're chemical technologists making machines of war. Okay, so that's one option. Moving on, we have basically ninjas is this one. Deathmaster Snikch. That's difficult to say, of Clan Eshin. And this one is basically a ninja clan, very specific hierarchy. The third one is a warlord, Queek. I thought it was Queen Headtaker, excuse me. Queek Headtaker of Clan Moors. If you play Warhammer, I'm sure you're very frustrated right now because I will never be able to get all these names right. There's way too much in this parlay. But basically, this one is like a frontline combat one. These are infantry soldiers. Pretty reasonable approach. If you have so many rats, you could train them as rank and file soldiers. Derpy says if a rat is worth training for frontline combat, then they're taught by Clan Moors here. So the idea is that this is yeah, like straightforward soldiers. Although Derpy says best not to get in a fight with Queek. Although he might seem to be fighting you straight, getting hit with his sword reveals that he fights with poisons and tricks all the same. So it does seem like the rats have a bit of an overall flavor. The poison or the kind of chemical weaponry of that first technology faction. I'll summarize them once we get through them all. It sounds like that's something that they all kind of share. So that's a flavor we have. Okay, the fourth one. The rat's a bit too invested in CRISPR. Ah, yes. Genetic modification. Throt the unclean of Clan Molder. Okay, so it sounds like these are genetically mutated ones? Rat ogres. Ooh, okay. Grafting other rats to them, or like weapons to their heads. That's terrifying. Okay, so this is kind of like a Frankenstein monster style thing. And then finally, the last one is Clan Pestilence, Lord Skrolk. Maybe that one's right. The rat who figured out how to weaponize Skaven stink into a weapon. Gross. Having plague rats that even if someone defeats them, they'll get scraped and have a nasty infection. Okay, so this one is just straight up poison. That seems a little similar to the technology one, but maybe lower tech. Okay, so those are our options. So again, the overall question here is, how are we going to manage this very numerous faction to best effect, deal with the infighting? But these are the archetypes we have to pick from. So to summarize them and kind of what they're doing to make good use of the numerousness of each faction, we got basically weapons. If your individual units are very weak, building advanced technology to improve their firepower seems logical. So that's an approach. Arm them, basically. Then there's the ninja one. Not very strong in a straight up fight. Don't have a straight up fight. Okay, also perfectly reasonable. Again, obviously I'm oversimplifying, and I don't actually know anything about Warframe beyond what I've Warhammer beyond what I've read. So clearly these are not going to be exactly like the ones in game. They couldn't possibly be, but we're abstracting a bit now. The third one, they're rank and file soldiers. You have a lot of soldiers, but they're individually weak. Deploy a lot of soldiers. Big deal. There's strength in numbers. Then the fourth one, they're individually weak. Improve them so they're not as individually weak. And fifth, you have a lot of individually weak soldiers. Count on them dying and infect the people they kill. Okay. And again, remember, we have an eye toward dealing with infighting as well. So the first thing that comes to mind, maybe we could just talk pros and cons for all of them. That's smart. Let's do that. The technology one, that's what came to mind first. Well, one way to deal with the whole infighting thing would be to build weapons that other clans can use. Having some kind of asset that you can use politically to get the other clans to stop jurying for power with you might be a good approach. And it is a good way to deal with having weak individual units. I also think that the idea of having a lot of population and then an approach that is very industry focused, like you have to build all the weapons, that seems like good synergy. You can then arm yourself. Humans are a really good example of like basically this strategy. Another thing is that it sounds like the rats are not particularly unintelligent. That just sounds very similar to humans. Obviously being more numerous than like any other creature is not necessarily defining of humans, but there sure are a lot of us. That seems logical. It seems like something a human would say they wanted to do, right? Take this type of approach. But again, the idea that you could sort of sell weapons to the other factions, not only to keep them from wanting to attack you, because then they get the supply, but also because you can use it to balance out power and keep a sort of stalemate. Sell the weapons to the faction that is a little behind to keep the balance of power in check might be an approach. Now you might be saying, well, what if they just kill you and take your weapons manufacturing? You can take an approach where you keep the exact designs secret, not, hidden from any specific individual. That might work. That's still a bit risky, but I feel like that is a good choice. Like that one, that sounds smart to me. Okay, the ninja one. This one is interesting because I feel like you're leaning into intelligence gathering, which seems smart for managing, for micromanaging. I don't think this is a good one for fighting other opponents, though. I feel like the sneaky stabby thing, a stealthy approach in general. I'm a person who sometimes gets a little bit prickly about generalism, like having a build that works broadly in every situation. Making a trade-off, something a little specific, but it's really good in its specific role, isn't the same as doing something like this, where it's like, okay, as long as we have an environment to hide in, very powerful. But if we have to fight on an open field, we literally just do nothing and we lose. Again, maybe that's not how they work in Warhammer, but I don't know that. In my mind, the archetype of ninja clan has that big, significant drawback. Like, that's a problem. There might be some way to deal with it, but I don't know that. Again, from my perspective, it seems like that would be a pretty big drawback. So I'm worried about this one when fighting others. When infighting, it seems like exactly who you want to be, and I would assume that a culture that developed a clan of ninjas, it's probably appropriate to their terrain. I would imagine for dealing with other Skaven, we're going to have places to hide. I'm imagining the forested ninja village, classic. So this seems really good for infighting, very good information gathering and assassinating strategy. After all, I also think assassins are more valuable when it's your own people. That might sound very paradoxical. The idea being you know who to kill, like the important political figures. You don't have to go information gather who even is the leader that you should kill. You kind of know that because this is a bit of infighting. So that seems good. Again, I feel like in terms of combat power outside of the infighting situation, maybe this one doesn't score as well. Okay, then we have the opposite. The sort of the open combat, the warlord one that's like rank and file soldiers. Kind of feels like the opposite, right? Doesn't seem like you'd have a lot of advantages in terms of infighting, at least at first. I've got something in mind though. But I do think it's a good, straightforward approach to just overwhelm enemies with numbers. I do also feel like in the world of the fleshy humanoid creatures, humans, hello. What are we fighting against? Elves, orcs, etc. How inferior are Skaven or anything really? Unless they're way smaller than I'm imagining, it kind of feels like, are you that far behind? I feel like a numbers advantage is very meaningful, is what I'm getting at. It feels like doesn't matter, but it's very surmountable to just be weaker, but you massively outnumber your opponents. Obviously, that depends on exactly how much. But it feels to me like, while straightforward, the idea of just overwhelming with raw numbers is a winning strategy, potentially. Like, that's not bad. Numbers do matter in war. And you're implying that they're not unskilled individual fighters either. They've got some guile, poisons. I also feel like this one has a political advantage. I feel like I don't know if the Skaven care about this, but it seems very, it seems reasonable to assume that a faction that goes for that big bongo glory on the battlefield is maybe a little bit more desirable than these next two, who basically turn you into a bioweapon. It seems like something you'd want to join up with a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe that's not true. I guess you're going to die in the open field of combat, but I don't know. To me, it seems like maybe this figure is going to be have some political leverage, some visibility. And sheer numbers are not bad in terms of infighting either. Having a large presence is good. It can be a lot to manage. Now, personally, I haven't put myself into this quite a lot because I'm just summarizing here. Then I'll get into more like, all right, but what do I want to pick? And I will just say right off the bat that this is the one that immediately turns me off. I'm all about having that lean, mean fighting machine. A big army, you already lost me. I mean, that's just my idiosyncratic preference. Okay. The fourth one, these are the kind of biomutants, taking the approach of having, you have a lot of individually weak fighters. Let's make them stronger. Let's improve them. Yeah, on the surface, very much fits my personal philosophy. I don't know. I'm worried about this one. There's a sort of unreliability issue. I feel like the weapons manufacturing thing is also like a little bit of a liability, but this one is, you're working with abominations that may or may not be fully controllable. Maybe you can control them, but I don't know. Um, to me, this seems similar to the fifth one in that Derpy mentions at the end that they can engineer the rats to explode when they die. So that seems effective from a combat perspective, especially if you have a lot of units. Again, politically, it feels like a little bit difficult to convince people you're working for the good of rat kind. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they don't care about that. But yeah, I don't know. This one is hard. It depends how they flavor the abomination thing. But traditionally, it would be a matter of concern that whether you can control them. Also, notice there's a thing about wolf rats, were rats. It doesn't say that, but again, there seems like a theme of maybe you can't fully control these. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. But otherwise, sounds cool. Not a bad approach. It sounds like you have individually a lot of strong units. And the idea that rats reproduce a lot, and then this is making that an even more prominent trait, that feels like playing to your strengths a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to argue with this one in terms of philosophy, but specifically, I am a little bit worried about the logistics. Again, this is a little bit of my preference as a build crafter showing where I have a tendency to shy away from things that feel. I don't mind if they're specialized or niche, but it feels a bit unreliable instead. Again, kind of like the ninja thing. Niche, fine, good, maybe. But if we outright don't do the thing sometimes, open combat, or like our units occasionally will not behave, I can be a little gun shy about that. That's a personal thing about me. I would say I'm not a very picky player overall, though. I could imagine myself enjoying, like I have in the past used like randomness and enjoyed it as long as the reward feels high enough. So I don't know. Again, philosophically, this one sounds like me, but I'm concerned about the specifics. And then finally, we have the kind of bioweapon one, the weaponized Skaven stink. This one seems similar to the weapon manufacturing and the genetic engineering one, but I guess it's kind of like zombies a little bit, right? And they're gonna, oh, it's so gross, spreading the plague thing. I I worry that this one again is really bad in terms of infighting. Like, I guess you'll just kill your opponents. Maybe that's really good. Again, maybe I'm thinking too much about politics here, but it feels like something where you infect your fellows. This one might be really good with vaccines or like some kind of cure. You make your own units able to resist, the way diseases work, the way viruses work, something the world has learned a lot about in recent years, hopefully anyway. You can be immune but still carry lots of these things. I'm no expert, but we've all learned a little bit recently. So giving your own units, your own faction members, the ability to not suffer the negative effects of a disease you engineer while still passing it on to others seems like a very good, don't mess with me kind of thing. So maybe that's really good for infighting. That does seem very solid. I love poison too. I've always been a damage over time fan. Not that this is the only one that's like that. Yet it seems like kind of a theme of the faction overall. But I yeah, I like that idea. So that's cool. Again, maybe my normal playstyle, it would maybe be this. And I like the idea of gaining the immunity and having the disease be a sort of political leverage shield. It's not like the weapons thing where they could theoretically just take your weapons if only one person knows the vaccine. or how to give them immunity, and then you just won't give it out, then you all die of disease if you don't do things my way. Like that seems effective in a way that it might not be as much. I am a little bit worried about the genetic engineering faction doing something about that. But anyway, finally, something I missed that I thought of as I went through is that the second one, the kind of ninja faction, you said at the end that there's a bit where the leader of this faction is interested in kind of balancing power, which I said I was interested in doing with weapons dealing. So that appeals to me. I felt like I was being a bit unfair to the ninjas. Again, I was saying I feel like politically, in terms of infighting, that faction would be quite strong. It sounds like you're saying maybe yes. Anyhow, finally, it comes time for a decision. So which of the five? Again, in short, we have weapons manufacturing, ninjas, kind of rank and file soldiers. It makes it sound so lame, though. Warriors, we'll say it that way. It's hard to summarize these. Genetic engineering, and then plague. We'll say it that way. Again, I think from if you told me nothing about a game and I had to pick one, I think I would pick the plague thing. But I like the idea of the ninja one. I'm just worried about, again, environment. It depends on biome. There might be some way to, maybe I'm worrying too much about that. Just smoke bombs on their own eliminate the concern about fighting in the open? I don't think so. I've thought a lot over the course of my time playing video games about the appeal of the rogue or the thief, of an assassin style character. When I played World of Warcraft when I was younger, I spent a lot of time in Booty Bay. If you played World of Warcraft for any amount of time near the beginning of its lifespan, you know what I'm talking about. Rogues stealthing around Booty Bay and backstabbing you right outside the range of the guards. Well, that's that classic World of Warcraft experience. It was a nightmare. And that feeling, like that environment was so perfect for rogues. Even being able to jump into the water, like between the planks. This is kind of a little seaside cove town. It was perfect for this type of assassin character. And there were environments where being a rogue would be quite frustrating. Not that World of Warcraft is the only kind of rogue. It's just an example. I liked that. Maybe I'm just being picky about. I don't want to get caught in an open field. Like you fire a bunch of smoke bombs. Fire a cluster grenade that's got a bunch of smoke bombs in it. I don't know, but that's not enough. Like you do get some cover. Anyway, I don't know. So I'm struggling with that. It doesn't have to be just me. This is not solo player Zandy going ham against the other factions, but I'm kind of acting like it is. So that's not fair. I do like the idea of having, I said I wanted like a small number of very strong or skilled individuals. And it does kind of feel like Ninja Clan Here I Stand is that, that maybe appeals to that thing I said I wanted. The mutant thing, again, when I see the details in practice, I might be sold on that one. I don't know, I'm selling myself on the ninjas. But the plague thing, again, you've got that appeal of vaccinating and then nobody can really take that away from you is the hope. That's interesting. But you would want assassins to kill anybody who developed the thing. I can see how this would be fun, having a whole sort of storyline just about the infighting between these different factions. You can see how it could be balanced, how that could be enjoyable. Derpy, you did write a lot in this parlay, and when I saw this, I thought, this is someone who wants to share something they enjoy. As much as this is too much for me to include every detail in one parlay, I think you did kind of do a good job of, I sort of get why this would be fun, I think I do anyway, a little bit from a flavor perspective. I feel like you captured that fairly well. There is sort of a unique appeal to each one, for example. And again, I can imagine how them infighting would have its own interesting bits. There is a bit of a stereotype of different archetypes of gang or clan fighting against each other. There'll be one that has this approach, one that has that approach. That definitely is a bit of a trope, sure. But I can imagine this being pretty fun. And I like that they all seem to have a flavor of, they're all kind of violating the Geneva Conventions a bit there. None of them are completely without this flavor of of poison and backstabbing and treachery. I like that they're these archetypes, but they're all flavored with this kind of lens of these are poison wielding sneaky guys, that's fun. I think that appeals to me. Having a whole the ability to pick between different flavor, but they still have a kind of general approach. I said at the beginning, how are each of these addressing having a bunch of weak units? And the obvious way is just poison, just poison. How do you, David and Goliath, the enemy? And so it's interesting that they all kind of follow that through as well. I don't know. I'm really selling myself in the ninja thing. I really like that culture. The whole ninja culture is it could mean a lot of things. I'm gonna have to explain that a bit, but that interests me a lot. I think it's a fun idea. This idea that you have, very skilled individuals. I think a big thing about fantasy in general is the idea that the individual has more of an effect. To me, that's a very core element of fantasy. One of the most frustrating aspects of reality is how little the individual matters. People love to say, your vote counts, et cetera, et cetera. And we all know it's a little more complicated than that. Yes, I think people should go out and vote, but it's not because your individual vote matters. It's because it represents something about the actions of the whole, not an individual vote. One vote really doesn't matter, but when people decide to go out and vote, it isn't just them. I would love a world where it really was just that one vote that mattered. And to me, the ninja aesthetic kind of is that thing. These idiosyncratic, particular people, these caricatures that individually matter a lot. Another thing about fantasy that I always think about is how we humans often really enjoy having specific characters, people we can relate to and follow through an event. But some archetypes do not naturally have individuals. For example, if you're using a bunch of rank and file warriors, you have a big army, that does not naturally lend itself to having a standout character. The defining characteristic is that there isn't a standout character. There are lots of stories about seeing the perspective of that one soldier. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy those stories. I have really enjoyed a lot of them. I think the grit and seeing the little moments where an individual soldier influences the outcome of a fight by making a small but involved decision, making a gentle suggestion that is taken up, and that soldier actually had a huge impact, but it's impossible to see from another frame of reference. Like, that's really cool, don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to say that I think the storytelling habit of showing things from an individual's perspective can require a bit of fantastical interpretation for some archetypes, right? You're not going to get this badass, stereotypically anime kind of hero character in a standard army. They don't have those. That's not a thing that happened. It doesn't mean you can't write a cool fantasy story about one, or that you can't show the perspective from a soldier on the ground. Oh boy. Just to say that it isn't a thing that happens by default. But there are some types of historical combat unit that did have, a single idiosyncratic, they've got their own style kind of unit. And ninjas are a good example of that. Do you see what I'm trying to say? To put it a different way, fantasy characters that some of us have really enjoyed, I feel like ninja culture is an example of where the actual real historical events in our reality did have something much closer to those characters. It isn't as much of a fantasy interpretation when you have those characters. You can have something quite down to earth, and you can see how the way that those clans were run encouraged the individual rising above the group in some ways. Not all of them, of course, and I'm not an expert on ninja history in every culture. But there is that element, which I find interesting, basically just refreshing. A lot of reality is not about the individual, is about you being in a meat grinder where you do not matter. And that's not good. It can be very edgy to focus on, no, I'm way different than everyone else. Like, no, none of us are, really. At the same time, I don't think we'd live in a worse world if we individually mattered a bit more. So I like that kind of thing. I tend to enjoy that kind of thing. Sometimes I catch myself saying I don't really relate to or resonate with any fantasy. And that's lazy. That's not really true. Like, maybe not specifically very much, but there are broad themes that I consistently enjoy. And I hope I explained sort of well that. So why am I picking the ninja thing? Well, I gave a lot of reasons why I was interested in certain factions, but ultimately it's because that aesthetic appeals to me. I hope that is an interesting answer. And again, I feel like, I hope you don't mind me interpreting this way, Derpy. In spirit, I feel like this parlay is a bit about sharing something you enjoy. So I hope you didn't mind that I chimed in with my version as well. Thanks for the question. It was a lot of fun to go through them. I hope I summarized them okay. It's challenging, but given the limited time, I hope I did all right.